What happens kung biglang ayaw sumunod? Does that mean there's no more love? So that's why we're saying that love is not always saying yes, and more specifically, Christian love. The Christian love that we're talking about tonight is not always saying yes. Christian love is also not defensive. Para sa ibang tao, yung pagmamahal parang investment kasi. Invest ako, dapat mayroong return. Pero syempre, kapag may returns, meron ding risks. Diba? You cannot have a high return, low risk situation most of the time. Similarly, Christian love is also that way. You have to take risks. You cannot be defensive. You cannot be afraid of getting hurt. You cannot be conservative because you're afraid that yung nilalabas mo baka hindi bumalik, or yung nilalabas mo paghirap or pag-ibig, makasakit sa'yo eventually. If you are always having these thoughts at the back of your minds, you cannot love 100%. You're being defensive, you're being careful. So, brothers and sisters, true love can never be painless. Who among us here have not experienced any pain at all because of love? Wala. Christian love is the same. No? Christian love, not just because it's love involving God, it's also not painless. But for Christian love, what's good is the pain can be endured through unwavering commitment. The pain can be endured and injuries can be healed through patience and forgiveness. Another thing that Christian love is not is that it is not self-seeking. So it's a bit similar to the previous one where may hinahanap ka, may agenda ka. There's something that you're looking for in return. Ang true Christian love actually is ready for self-denial. Christian love should not be expecting anything in return. Christian love is also not manipulative. Okay? So, what is manipulative love, you might ask? Manipulative love is a situation when a person is giving love as a reward for the other person. Or the person is giving love because of something that the other has done. Or on the opposite side, wini-withdraw niya yung love as a form of punishment for the other person. Pag mayroong ginawa yung partner na hindi niya gusto, I will withdraw my expressions of love. So that's actually manipulative love. And Christian love should not be that way also. Unfortunately, love is so powerful that most of us are actually tempted at one time or another to use it this way. So, when the situation is, again, pag matsunurin yung other party, manipulative naman yung other party, that's a recipe for chaos actually in the relationship. True love should never be conditional and dependent on whether the other party is meeting your expectations or not. Similarly, wala ka dapat expectations actually kay God when you think about it. So, your love should not be based on, but I expect God dapat ganito, dapat ganyan. So now that we've said what Christian love is not, what is Christian love? At some point we have to define it. And in John chapter 15, Jesus spoke about love. And he said, "As the Father loves me, so I also love you. Remain in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and remain in His love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete. This is my commandment. Love one another as I love you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. So, aside from the greatest commandment, si Jesus' commandment dito sa John, and there are two important points being raised in this passage. First is that Christian love is necessarily connected with keeping God's commandments. Therefore, we can say that Christian love is not compatible with sinning. If you're supposed to be keeping God's commandments, your Christian love cannot be expressed if you are a sinful person. That's essentially what they're saying. You cannot live a double life. Kadalasan po, we find ourselves justifying our sinful actions by saying, wala namang nakakakita. Wala namang nakakaalam. Diba? What he or she doesn't know won't hurt him or her. That's actually a dangerous seed to plant in your mind. When you start thinking that, yes, I know, masasaktan siya. Pero masasaktan siya kung alam niya. So kung hindi niya malaman, hindi naman siya masasaktan. So, Christian love is not compatible with this kind of thinking. Because if you think about it, diba, a sin is a sin. Whether or not somebody caught you doing it, whether or not somebody sees you doing it, the crime is still a crime. Whether the perpetrator is caught or not. Alam natin yan dito sa Pilipinas. We all know that crimes were committed, but the criminal remains at large. The second important point is the other commandment given to us, that we love one another as Jesus has loved us. Again, here, Jesus is acting as the model for us to follow when it comes to loving others. How did Jesus love? In this case, He's showing a self-sacrificial love. Jesus took loving others, however, beyond simple sacrifices that I mentioned, like giving our time in service, imparting our wisdom, or praying for others. He actually said, if you read the last line, that the kind of love we should emulate is that in which we are willing to die for others, just as He did. Are we willing to die for our loved ones? No? Sometimes, conceptually, it's easy to say yes, but it's not that easy. Mabigat. Pero hindi naman lahat tayo, actually, may calling na mamatay para sa ating minamahal. So let us take a look at another example that Jesus gave to demonstrate how to love others. Siguro most of you know the story about the washing of the feet. No? This is reenacted normally kapag Holy Week, Holy Thursday. Kaya pag Huwebes Santo po, buhay ang mga negosyo ng mga manikurista. Kasi nahihiya sa pari yung mga magpapawashing of the feet. Magpap-cleaning muna. Anyway, nung lumapit na si Jesus kay Simon Peter, ayaw ni Simon Peter magpahugas ng paa. Sabi niya, "You will not wash my feet, Lord." And this is because by the Jewish tradition, ang nagwawash ng feet is the youngest slave. And here, Jesus was, their teacher and master, wanting to do it for them. So, ang normal human reaction nila, bakit ikaw, Lord? Hindi pwedeng ikaw. Imagine it this way, no? For those of you working, lapit yung boss nyo, may dalang towel at saka tangganan. Sabihin niya, Archibald, hugasak yung paa mo. Diba? Hindi ata dapat siya yung Mahihiya ba kayo? Matatakot ba kayo? Ako, matatakot ako kasi baka, boss, sasabunin mo ba ako? Diba? So, but seriously, after Jesus had washed the feet of the disciples, this is what happened. When he had washed their feet and put his garments back on and reclined at table again, he said to them, "Do you realize what I have done for you? You call me teacher and master, and rightly so, for indeed I am. If I therefore, the master and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. I have given you a model to follow, so that as I have done for you, you should also do." Thus, dying on the cross was not only an example of how Jesus said we should love. Here he demonstrates Christian love as service love. After which he tells his disciples and us to do likewise. So, as Christians, we should be ready and humble enough to serve others as a manifestation of Christian love, without bias, regardless of who we are serving. The best example, siguro, that I can think of right now is happening around you right now. Your service team, your facilitators, they've all been working hard preparing for this CLP, weeks ahead of even the first day when you stepped here. They're all busy, like you. They all have families that they want to go home to, also, like you. May sariling buhay din sila. Gusto rin nilang manood ng telenovela pag-uwi. Namimiss nila ngayon. But they prepare hard and come here early and leave late every Wednesday as their expression of service and love for you and for God. Aside from the examples given to us by Jesus, St. Paul, in his first letter to the Corinthians, also gives us a very good guide on the characteristics of Christian love. Siguro, karamihan sa inyo narinig itong reading na ito nung kasal nyo or kasal na in-attendan nyo. But let's read it. Love is patient. Love is kind. It is not jealous. It is not pompous. It is not inflated. It is not rude. It does not seek its own interests. It is not quick-tempered. It does not brood over injury. It does not rejoice over wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Siguro, quickly, if you want to take it point by point, what does St. Paul mean when you are, love is patient? Being patient is being slow to anger, being able to give allowance for the shortcomings of others. Love is kind. By this, being less critical of others. Upbuild, but instead of being critical, you are more upbuilding and encouraging. Love is not jealous. So love, it means that love should be trusting. Love is not pompous or inflated. It means that you should be humble and not thinking of your own importance in your relationship. Love is not rude. By this, you accord honor and respect to others, particularly the other party. It's in a loving relationship. Ito inulit, kaya sabi ko, mukhang importante talaga. Sinabi na nga love is patient, sinabi pa love is not quick-tempered. Pareho lang na. Parang tinatamaan tayo. But it just means that we should try to master our emotions and our feelings so that we do not blurt out things that we do not really actually mean to say when we are angry or hot-tempered already. Love does not brood over injury. So, bawal mag-hold ng grudges or resentments. Bawal magtago sa closet nung ilalabas na, pero di ba nung ikaw, nung ganito, nung ganito. Pag tapos na, tapos na. No more grudges. No more resentment. Love does not rejoice over wrongdoing. Ito minsan the opposite kasi. When you do not love somebody, sometimes you feel happy when something bad happens to them. So, that should not be the case. Love forbears. You can bear insult, you can bear injury, disappointment without taking counteraction. Love hopes, meaning you have a positive attitude towards life and towards problems, and can remain joyful and peaceful under any circumstances. And huling-huli, love endures, which means you can bear all things you can bear all things with passive resignation. Not with passive resignation, but with triumphant fortitude. Now, here's something I'd like you to do. We'll read this passage again, but this time we'll replace I for the word love. So, I am patient. I am kind. I am not jealous. I am not pompous. I am not inflated. I am not rude. I do not seek my own interests. I am not quick-tempered. I am not quick-tempered. I do not brood over injury. I do not rejoice over wrongdoing, but I rejoice with the truth. I bear all things, believe all things, hope all things, endure all things. Ang ganda po, no? Is this how we love? Kung lahat ng tayo magagawa ito araw-araw, lahat ng tao magawa ito araw-araw, our society, our country, our world will probably be a much better place. At this point, we have now defined what Christian love is not, and also what Christian love is supposed to be. So if Jesus commands us to love our neighbor as ourselves, of course, the next question is, who is our neighbor? Who is my neighbor? You might ask. Ang sagot po ni Jesus sa katanungan na ito ay yung kwento tungkol sa Good Samaritan. I'm sure you're all familiar with the story of the Good Samaritan. Okay. In the interest of time, sige, I will not read through it. But if you would like to read it, please feel free to do so. It's in Luke chapter 10, verse 29 to 37. So ano ba yung message ni Jesus sa kwento na ito? It's important to note that during the time of Jesus, the Jews despised the Samaritans. Hate na hate nila. Mortal na magkaaway po sila. Thus it was remarkable, even unthinkable, for a Samaritan to help a Jew. And yet that was the parable of Jesus. Siguro kung ngayon yun, makabasa ka ng storya na si Miriam Santiago, tinulungan si Senator Enrile, no way! Diba? Parang ganun ito. Or si Gretchen at si Claudine. Ay, magkapatid sila. O di kaya, ang favorite ko, Ateneo versus Lasal. Ayan po, itong picture na to, matagal na, UAAP Finals, 11 years ago. Natumba na yung kalaban, si Mac Cardona, dinuduro pa ni Wesley Gonzalez. Pero ngayon po, alam na mo, Ateneo ka. Pero ngayon, hindi na po ganyan ang Atenista at Lasalista. Nagtutulungan na po sila. Last year, this was taken during a UAAP game between Ateneo and DLSU. Si Thomas Torres po yan, hindi ko yan kamag-anak. Nung magka-cramps si Wami Chongson, ang unang tumulong sa kanya, yung player pa ng Lasal. Siguro nag-toxic si Thomas Torres. Ang problema po, this season, hindi na Lasal ang mortal na kaaway ng Ateneo. Siguro kailangan mag-CLP si Coach Bo at si referee number 3. Anyway, mabalik tayo sa kwento. In the parable, the Samaritan helped the injured and helpless Jew after several fellow Jews. As you can see in the picture behind, there was a priest and there was a Levite who looked the other way when they saw the injured man. Sa bagay, kung ako rin yung Samaritano, siguro, what would you do? Tumawag ka na lang ng tulong, di ba? Ituro mo. Meron nung nasaktan doon. Tulungan nyo. Kapwa nyo, Hudyo. But what did the Samaritan do? Unlike the fellow Jews, the priest and the Levite, tinulungan niya. Sinakay niya dun sa donkey niya. Dinala niya sa inn. Inalagaan niya. Pinunasan niya. Ginamot niya yung mga sugat. Tapos because he had business the next day, nag-iwan pa siya ng pera. Sabi niya dun sa innkeeper, pag kinulang pa yan, bayaran mo muna. Babayaran ko in return. Okay? So, malinaw po ang mensahe ni Jesus sa atin. Our neighbor is anyone who is in need, regardless of the situation or condition. Even if they are the last persons we would want to help here on earth. Even if they are the last persons we would want to be seen helping in this earth. So who is our neighbor? Kayo po. It could literally be your neighbor na makulit. Neighbor na laging lasing. Neighbor na laging kumakanta ng videoke na napakalakas. Neighbor na nagmumaharang yung sasakyan sa driveway ni lagi. Or it could be a friend na nagtaksil sa inyo na hindi na kayo nagpapansinan ngayon. It could be a difficult boss. Meron bang boss na hindi? It could be your household helper or your driver. Or sometimes it could even be your own spouse. Sometimes when you're having conflicts, the most difficult neighbor to love is your own spouse. At kapag minalas ka at outside ako ng buka, baka dun ka pa kailangan makitulog sa kapitbahay mo makulit na naglalasing, na malakas kumanta, na nakaharang kotse. So at this point, I'd like to call on my wife, Cherry, to share about an experience she had with loving a difficult neighbor.
Good evening. I'd like to share with you my experience with a neighbor in the person of my former boss at work. While this happened over 12 years ago, I still continue to apply the lessons I've learned from this experience in my day-to-day life at work now. My former supervisor is very intelligent, a summa cum laude graduate, and a CPA board top-notcher. But perhaps because of this, she was quite a perfectionist with very high standards and a very high level of expectation from everyone she worked with, whether these were her direct reports, peers, or bosses. My agony first began when she started to ridicule me about my work. She would always find fault in everything that I did and would always put me down by saying some very demeaning words about my output and capabilities. Thus, whenever she would call me to her cubicle, I would already be nervous and scared of what errors she would be pointing out in my work. And because of my nervousness, I sometimes could not even answer her simple queries or would already say the wrong answers out of confusion. Even worse, her scolding could be heard by my former supervisor and the rest of my peers, including my husband, who was also my office mate at that time. Usually, they would all just leave the room one after the other because they couldn't stand what they were hearing. And the only consolation, if I may call it as such, was the fact that I was not the only one in this lowly situation. We were 3 analysts in all reporting to her, and all of us would consistently receive the daily initiation with no exclusions. One time I asked her if I could be transferred to another department, whether I could be of help instead of being a burden to the group. But she quickly retorted, "Matagal na nga kitang gustong ilipat, wala namang gustong tumanggap sa'yo." So while I kept telling myself not to believe what she was saying, I started to lose confidence and to feel insecure, even when I was already at home with my family. I was afraid that even my decisions at home were probably wrong. I even started to question whether my past achievements at school and at work were for real and whether I truly deserved them. I reached the point of dreading the idea of waking up and going to work each day. And in the midst of all this, constant prayers were my source of strength. I would share our experiences with our household members in the CFC community, and they would act as my constant prayer warriors each week. My husband found it doubly difficult because he also had to bear with hearing his wife being insulted every day and not being able to defend or do anything to stop it. But he was always at my side and was my #1 prayer warrior, always lifting me up with his constant reminders that still linger in my mind. And the first one goes, "These too shall pass. God will not give you trials that you cannot bear. It will not persist for long." The other one was, "Just remain patient, keep a strong faith. Remember Jesus' examples of patience and understanding that we should follow." And the last and funny one was, "Maswerte ka nga at hindi ka naging siya. Mas gusto mo ba na ikaw yung nagagalit everyday kaysa yung ikaw na lang pinapagalitan niya ngayon?" On a serious note, my husband asked me to try to understand what is causing her to act that way. That maybe she has many personal problems or someone in her family is ill, or whatever. Honestly, at the time, I couldn't appreciate those words of comfort from my husband, since for me, they were like motherhood statements and were easier said than done. What I wanted to hear from him as a sign of support was that it would be okay for me to resign and find a better job. My daily struggle at work went on for over a year. I just focused on the many blessings which God had been showering upon me and considered this difficulty as an opportunity to help the Lord carry His heavy cross. I got used to the daily mockery, and surprisingly, I never hated her. Thanks to God's gift of patience and understanding. I even started praying for her to be given these gifts as well, since being angry all the time, even with trivial matters, could eventually be detrimental to her health. I prayed for her peace and happiness. Our situation changed when the 3 of us under her individually requested our department manager to be transferred to another department without the others knowing about it. And while it was not a simple and quick process, our department head decided to keep the 3 of us and was able to have our supervisor transferred to another department where she is still working by herself with no direct reports under her. This turned out to be the most effective setup for her and the company as well. And now that I'm already in her shoes with direct reports under me, I am very conscious of my words and actions, as I don't want my staff to go through the same difficulty. I keep a harmonious and friendly atmosphere in our group. I do not condemn them for any mistake committed, but rather help them resolve it and ensure that it doesn't happen again. My daily goal is to make them feel God's goodness and mercy in their daily undertakings. I believe that they will cascade the same attitude when they themselves become leaders someday. In closing, I just want to share this verse from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. And it goes, "You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." Thank you, and may God be praised.
Actually, nung sinabi ko na mabuti na lang, hindi ikaw naging siya. Sarili ko yung iniisip ko eh. Kasi kung ako yung pinapagalitan niya ng gano'n. Anyway, this is just our closing slide for our talk. Given the nature of love and our human limitations, our efforts alone will not be enough to make us genuinely love those who are difficult to love. For me personally, what has helped a lot is the saying, and actually this is not even Bible-based, but when they say, we cannot change others, we can only change ourselves. You cannot change the way other people act, but you can certainly change your attitude towards them and how you react, so that it does not lead you to sin, but rather it leads you to love. Of course, loving the most difficult people will still be impossible without God's help. But Jesus, who commanded us to love, also taught us the way and serves as our model for how to love others. Nauso ito a few years ago, no? May mga baller ID yung mga NBA players that said WWJD. Up to now, actually, I still remember this phrase. It's a very simple acronym that means, what would Jesus do? So whenever you're faced with a situation na parang nagagalit ka, naiinis ka, hindi mo alam gagawin mo sa isang tao, just think WWJD, what would Jesus do? And definitely, Jesus would not do what you want, what you were thinking of doing. So, for me, it helps. And when we're faced with the challenge of loving a difficult neighbor, who else can we emulate but Jesus Christ, who even forgave those who persecuted him and put him on the cross and allowed him to die. But that dying, that sacrifice, also saved us. And so with this in mind, and with the help of the Holy Spirit, we are empowered to love our neighbors as Jesus loved us. Thank you, brothers and sisters. May God be praised.
Thank you, Marcus, brothers. We'll go directly to the group discussion. Same grouping. So just find your